pilgrimage, and I know I speak for Judy and Laura and Cynthia when I say, first of all, we are so honored that so many of you took the time to come hear us today. Blair, thank you for asking us. And we are grateful and we praise God for the opportunity to share with you just a little bit about our pilgrimage to Israel with a wonderful group of fellow seekers of the faith from our friends at Eternity Church. We're delighted that you all are here with us. So if we could start, maybe if you all could help pull the blinds down there, I think we could see the slides a little more easily. And the lights, yeah. Okay. Just a few introductory remarks. I think the number of things that attracted us to this particular group, this pilgrimage, was threefold. One was the bond that we felt with a number of people who had taken the Alpha class. You've already heard about that, and I know this church has possibly over 100 people who have taken it, so if you haven't yet, I highly recommend it. Second were the leaders. We had Pastor Joe Anderson, originally from Richmond at Messiah Church, we're now retired in Florida, and our wonderful Pastor David Singh, who you have just been introduced to. David has done so much in this community. In addition to starting Eternity Church, he is the one who also brought Alpha to Richmond, Virginia. Almost 20 years ago, David, we decided? It's been a long time. So we've all been especially blessed by David as well as his wonderful wife, Nalina, who is here with us today as well. So thank you all. And the other focus of the trip that we especially loved was allowing ourselves to hear the Holy Spirit speak to us as we traveled. One other thing that we especially appreciated was Pastor Joe encouraging us to read scripture as we traveled, to sing hymns together, and to share communion with each other at various places along the way. He even suggested that those of us who would like to purchase chalices in various spots to do so, and that he would try to use these chalices as we broke the bread and drank the wine together in communion. And so I'm going to show you one right here. This is the chalice that I purchased in Jerusalem at the end of the trip, and was especially thrilled that we were able to use this at our last stop at the Garden Tomb, where our Jesus Savior Christ was buried and rose again from the dead. So here we are, the 4 FPC pilgrims to Israel. And here's the picture of our whole group. There were 24 of us. We were from varying backgrounds and different churches, but by the time the trip was over, we all had a real close bond and had some wonderful inspirational experiences, educational experiences, and especially some hysterical, uproariously hysterical, fun times together. When we landed in Tel Aviv, we were met by our fabulous guide named Jimmy Namor. Jimmy is a Christian. He was from Lebanon, but he also lives in Israel, so he has a dual citizenship. This is Jimmy. He has been giving to us for over 40 years, and he has helped Pastor Joe through a number of these. I think I told you that Pastor Joe has led these trips over 12 times, so it's another real drawing card for us. Jimmy was an encyclopedia on the subject of Israel. He knew everything from biblical background to the historical background to the societal to the cultural to the political. I mean, he knew everything. And everywhere we went, he knew everybody. Everybody knew him. And it was from the tradespeople to the townspeople to, the other guides and even the soldiers at the checkpoints. It was, Jimmy! Everybody knew and loved Jimmy, and we loved him so much as well. He was just a wonderful asset to our trip. This is the map. Now you have these copies of these maps at your table, so if you're able to see, you can kind of hopefully follow along a little bit as we proceed with our presentation. It shows where we began. Our journey was in, let's see if I can do this, in Jericho, and we went down to Masada and north, ultimately up to the Sea of Galilee area in the Golan Heights. Then we went west to Caesarea on the Mediterranean, and then finally back down to Bethlehem and Jerusalem. It was a very ambitious itinerary. I think we hit close to 30 places in about 12 days. And the first morning in Jericho, we woke up and we heard a Muslim chant in a nearby mosque. And this just reminded us the complexities and the multi-ethnic and multi-religious backgrounds of this incredible country that we were in. So we got on the bus and we took off about an hour south to Masada. This is Masada. Masada means fortress. And this site is on top of a plateau in the south part of Israel, and it rises 1,300 feet above the Dead Sea. This is a map. I hope you can see it, kind of. But this shows you the outcroppings of Masada. Beginning in, let's see, let me just think about this. The site is on top of a rock plateau. I think I told you that. And in the beginning, in 37 BC, King Herod built a palatial fortress here. And he recognized the importance of this strategic site. The fortress included palatial palaces. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Let me get this corner going. These were palaces that dropped off a terraced area on the northern end of Masada. There was a synagogue within this area, additional Western palace up in that area. There were evidence of many storerooms, a whole system of cisterns around here. This is a siege wall that was built that went all around the base of Masada. And outside the siege wall, you can see in some instances these little squares. These are remnants of Roman camps when the Romans came to attack Masada. After Herod's death, and then the Roman annexation of Judea and the final destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the last of the Jewish zealots revolted. And they fled to Masada to hold up against the Romans. And the story has it that there were approximately 8,000 Roman soldiers around Masada and trying to get up to attack these last of the Jewish zealots. Ultimately, they built a ramp on the western side, which you can still see here is an embankment, exactly where the Romans built this ramp to get up to this Masada. And when they arrived, the story goes that they were just astonished because the last of the zealots, maybe about 960 of these people with their family members, had committed suicide. And that's how they found them, rather than allow them to be captured or killed by the Romans. So if there's a Hollywood movie that was made about this historic event, some of you may have even seen it way back in the past. But that was pretty interesting and exciting for us to see. This is called the Snake Path. The Snake Path still exists today, and it goes from the bottom, 1,300 feet, up to the top. So people actually hike this today. It is decided that this is probably the same path that David walked on to get to the top of Masada, along with the Jewish zealots that many centuries ago. This is our, I keep getting the wrong one. That's our cable car. Going to the top. Here we are arriving at the top of Masada. You can see in the distance a little glimmer of the Dead Sea. I love this picture. I took this picture. This is looking down from that point I showed you on the map of the terraced area of the palaces that Herod built. So this is the remnants of one of the palace walls going straight down from where we were standing. Here's Jimmy just pointing out things and lots of ruins along the way, and there were lots of ruins. And here is that embankment I talked about. It's still there, and it's pretty amazing for us to see that and to think about Romans building this ramp on that embankment and going up to the top of Masada. Now, this is a little interesting subject. This is a picture of a rabbi in a little small glass compartment within the synagogue. There was a synagogue still at the top of Masada. He is in the process of handwriting copies of the Torah. To the right is a vessel where they keep the copies of the Torah. Now, a Torah scroll is the holiest, oldest object in Judaism. It's made up of the 5 books of Moses, and it must be written by a specially trained scribe called a soper situm. Torahs are used in synagogues around the world today. And throughout the centuries, they have been written in the same way as the very first Torah was written by Moses, about 3,300 years ago. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. The process takes about a year because it's all hand done in calligraphy on parchment paper. And it is made from many sheets of parchment paper that they sew together and put in a very long scroll. Now, Cynthia talked this gentleman into writing her name in Hebrew and giving it to her on a little piece of parchment paper. So, of course, I jumped in and tried to get him to do the same for me, and he wouldn't have any parts of it. So, Cynthia's just too cute. And finally, this is a view, again, of the Dead Sea from the top of Masada. So you can see how close we were to the Dead Sea, 1,300 feet above. This is En-Gedi. It was our next stop, and in Joshua 15:62, En-Gedi is mentioned among the wilderness cities of the tribe of Judah. En-Gedi is now one of the most important nature preserves in Israel. The park is on the eastern border of the Judean desert. It includes 2 spring-fed streams with fresh flowing water year-round. And this water probably does provide water for their agriculture as well as for consumption. Now, the Hebrew meaning of En is spring, and Gedi means goat kid. So there is the ibex goat kid. And David and I both bought stuffed animals for our grandchildren. You can see one over here. That is of the ibex. Only David's grandchild, I think, is what, 6 or 7? Mine's 15. But he still loves collecting stuffed animals. So the Hebrew's meaning of En is spring. I just mentioned that, and both the spring water and the goat was God's way of saving David when he was running from Saul in this desert area and hiding from Saul, and reached out and cried out to God for his help. So the spring water in the desert, as well as the goats, was David's saving grace from God. And Pastor Joe read to us there from Psalm 63, David's plea. "O God, my body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water." And then he read from 1 Samuel 23:29. From there, David went up and stayed in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Now here we are at this spot taking communion. And you can see David and Joe standing before us, and the rugged terrain on the left. Joe asked us to try to imagine, again, David running for his life in this rugged terrain, dry desert, and reaching out to God to save him. And with God's saving grace, he did, again, through the spring flowing waters and the goats. And then Joe asked us to remember that God reaches out to each and every one of us today with the living water for us to take in our dry and thirsty periods of our lives through the living Christ and his resurrection. That was pretty special when we stopped to reflect on these kinds of things and recognize that we were right there. Okay, now we're at Qumran. These are the Qumran caves. They are a series of caves, and they're also located in the Judean desert of the West Bank. They're close to the Dead Sea. It was amazing for us, again, to think about it was right here within these caves, not so far back. 1946 is when I was born. But to think that in our recent history, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in some of these caves that we were looking at. A Bedouin shepherd boy found the scrolls while he was looking for a lost goat in one of these caves. He found a nearly complete scrolls that were hidden in clay jars, and between 1946 and 1955, a total of 12 scrolls and fragments of the scrolls were found. These ancient scrolls contain texts from all the books of the Old Testament except Esther. It's pretty exciting when you think about that. So here we entered one of these caves, and it just gave us kind of some replicas of the clay jars that might have been there, and examples of scrolls of the Old Testament that was found within these clay jars. It is said that they were probably written by a breakaway Jewish sect called the Essenes, who lived in this area at the time. Okay, here we are at the Dead Sea. Now the Dead Sea, unlike the Sea of Galilee further north, is not prominently, it doesn't figure prominently into the Bible. But today it's mostly known because, as a tourist attraction, because of this physical phenomenon, natural phenomenon. It is the lowest point of dry land on Earth at 1,300 feet below sea level. It's actually a lake. Because it is the lowest point, that means that the water does not drain. So every day, around 7 million tons of water evaporate, leaving these minerals behind, and that causes the salt to increase. It's nearly 10 times as salty as the world's oceans, and as a result of the high salinity, just about everything and everyone who enters these waters float. And there we have an example. A gentleman floating, reading his newspaper. Judy especially liked this. She said, I saw that on postcards everywhere. And here we are. There you are, Barbara. And I think Wick's in there, and some of our group. And there's David floating. And we had a good time floating in the Dead Sea. All right, let me see. Where am I? Okay. Sorry, you all. Nothing in the Dead Sea lives, thus its name. This is because of its high mineral content. The waters are also long recognized for its medicinal purposes, and the mud at the bottom everyone loves for spa treatments. So there they are, our three bathing beauties. Getting their spa treatment. And I'm going to tell you right now, Elizabeth Arden Red Door can't touch this in terms of what we saw these girls come out of this mud with this beautiful silky skin. And here we are with Beth Sires visiting us today, along with Laura, at the greatest spot of all to end the day so they can get their stuff. 1,300 feet below the sea level, having a great time. All right, next up was Jericho. Jericho is 3 cities in one: Old Jericho, New Testament Jericho, and modern day Jericho. Now, Old Jericho claims to be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It dates back more than 10,000 years. It was the first city conquered by Joshua and the children of Israel when God once again created a miracle, divided the waters of the Jordan, and allowed the Israelites to cross the Jordan into Canaan, where they came upon Jericho. And as you know, the story goes, the Hebrews marched around the Jericho walls 6 days, blowing their trumpets, and on the 7th day the walls fell down. Now, it was clear that Jericho was a very small town, and the walls were most likely built in clay mud. And of course, through the centuries, they have totally disintegrated. But there's a little interesting point I was going to tell you about that. They have found, I think, let me see, where was that? Yeah, they found foundations of a watchtower from about 8000 BC in this area. So we thought that was kind of interesting. New Testament Jericho was built by Herod the Great and was the city that Jesus passed through while traveling to and from Jerusalem. Here's Zacchaeus' sycamore tree. And you know the story. Jesus called Zacchaeus to come down from that sycamore tree so he could go home and have dinner with him that night. And of course, Zacchaeus did, repented, and became a follower of Christ later that night. So here we have Jimmy and a few of the girls sitting right beneath the sycamore tree just 2,000 years later. This is today's Jericho. It's in Palestine, and it's known for its agriculture and a lot of fruit trees, and you can see that within this lovely garden. And here we have evidence of the fruit with Laura and Judy, surrounded by pomegranates and their banana hats and the fruit tree vendor. Well, all right, now I'm just going to be honest. I'm very disappointed because this is where I was going to show you my treat for the day. It was a video. But Judy and I came back early from Jericho and got on our bus. I'll just tell you the story. And she looked outside and she said, Blanche, look at there's that camel. And I looked up there and I said, yeah, that's a stuffed camel, Judy. I mean, seriously, I'm not kidding you. I said, that camel's not moving. It is a stuffed camel. No, it's not. No, it's not. So we kept looking, and it did not move an inch. And I insisted it was a stuffed camel. But finally, it moved its foot, and there's the example where we were so daggone excited. We busted out of that bus as fast as we could, ran out there, and we were greeted by Abdullah. Let me see. There's that daggone camel. And yeah, I couldn't wait. I mean, I wanted to befriend that camel. And Abdullah took both of us on a ride, and I have the most hilarious video of Judy. I'm in the promised land! And I'm just sick that you can't see it, but the slide machine didn't allow it. So there you just have to imagine Judy in the promised land riding this camel in the parking lot on Almatia, which means young camel that lets you ride on him. Yeah. So there's Almatia and Judy. And I will tell you right now, one huge bonus for me personally on this trip was getting to room with Judy Watkins. Because I'm serious. I had known Judy through all these years. We've taken so many Bible classes together. We love each other. But I had no idea how hysterical she is. And that's it. We spent every night in our room together, killing ourselves laughing on the floor till people, our friends, were beating on the walls. Go to sleep. Judy, you're a blessing to me. Okay, we don't get the video, but that's the story. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Let me see, where am I? What's the next one? Next was Beit Shin. Now, where is Beit Shin? Thank you all for your patience. Beit Shin is a city in the northern district of Israel, and it's located on the Via Maris, which is the ancient trade route at the junction of the Jordan River Valley and the Jezreel Valley. Okay, back in the dates of 3500 BC, in the biblical account of the battle of the Israelites against the Philistines, the bodies of King Saul and his 3 sons were hung on the walls of Beit Shin. In Roman times, Beit Shin was the capital of the city of the Decapolis. Now, the Decapolis was a group of 10 city-states that the Romans built, and this is the only one of them that's on the west side of the Jordan. And we were amazed to see truly how much of it still exists these many thousands of years later. This is the model. Nope, that's not the model. You forgot to switch that, Judy. That's okay. This is the model of what the city might have looked like back in the Roman days. And you can see there was a hippodrome theater, and there were bathhouses, and then all of these long roads with the columns lining, looking up to that hill that you saw in the first picture. And now here is what was left of the hippodrome, and an example of the bathhouse. And whenever they needed a potty break, there were many pots on which to sit. We had the men's side and the ladies' side. So this is the ladies' side. And here we are at the Jordan River, and this was our last stop on our second day of this wonderful trip. As we all know, baptism is an extremely important event in the believer's walk with Jesus Christ. The Bible talks about water immersion. Baptism is in which a believer makes a public confession of their faith. And Jesus led the way by example, by water immersion in the Jordan River. I'm just going to read this to you. In those days of Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee, was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens opened and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "Thou art my beloved Son. With thee I am well pleased." I dare say that everyone on this trip was especially looking forward to the possibility of being baptized or rebaptized in the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. As we lined up to enter the Jordan with Pastor Joe and Pastor David waiting for us, I am sure that we each had a personal prayer of redemption and then a feeling of undeserved amazing grace as we were fully immersed and then emerged from the waters. And then here we are being baptized by Pastors Joe and David in the Jordan River. First is Cynthia, and then Laura, now Judy, and finally me. Praise God. And I'll turn this over to Miss Cynthia.
Well, now we are leaving the Jordan River area and we are headed into the Sea of Galilee. So I want you to imagine, here we are at the Sea of Galilee. We're looking from Tiberias, where our hotel was, over to the other side into Jordan. And long, long time ago, you could come back and forth, but times have changed since the war in '69. There's no traffic back and forth. You have to have a special pass to get there. But what I want you, as we go through this area, I want you to look at the scenery. You've been to Masada. Did that make y'all thirsty? I mean, it just was so dry and so desolate. I mean, it just made you want to go, where's a green tree? And we'd see them, but it just made you realize when you had no water that Jesus is the living water. And it just became more and more affirmed to us there. But anyway, so here we have the sharp contrast between Masada and Jordan. It also, as you can see, the Sea of Galilee is full of life. And if you remember back to the Dead Sea, it's evaporating, so it's even now got pathways that you can get from one side of another. So even this sea is losing water as well. So, and I'll share with those some of the stories. You can see where the difference is. It can be called Lake Tiberias or Lake Kinrith, and it is fed by the Jordan River. And if you look at your map, stretch your imagination, it's in the shape of a violin. And I'm going to say this back and forth, but throughout the whole trip, I just couldn't believe we were where Jesus had lived, where he walked, where he taught, where he performed miracles. Throughout our whole trip, we were all in awe of the places we went to know that he performed these miracles. So the next picture is some of our eternity buddies. We had a blast, and we were frantically taking notes of all the information that was being just given to us constantly. So we would come back to the hotel. We were living high style, waterfront view, and going over our notes, finding verses in the Bible, and just sharing. Oh, did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. Oh, did you hear that version? No, I didn't hear that version. But anyway, it was great, the bantering back and forth that we grew and learned. And I have to say, another piece of our trip was, you know, when you travel with 24 people and you only know maybe a handful of them, you don't know how the group is going to come together. But this group, it was like we were made to be together. We loved each other, we laughed with each other, we cried with each other, we shared and supported one another. And it just truly, I've got goosebumps right now, just thinking the friendships that we developed there as we went through Jesus' land. And I'm just so appreciative of Laura for sharing the opportunity to go. And Laura was my roommate, and we had equally, we did. We even blew the electricity out on our floor when we were in Jerusalem. Not once, but 3 times. It's all in the cause of beauty, you know. But anyway, I want you to just enjoy this beautiful sunrise over here to the right, and here on the, on the left, and then on the right is the Sea of Galilee, and how beautiful that water is. It was interesting that Pastor Joe, when we started our trip, he said, I want you all to be aware of distractions. And he spoke about distractions, that they would be things that would take our eye, take our heart, take our minds off of what we were there to do. And it was so true that we were in Jericho and we had all these flies flying all over us, and we were just trying to listen to what was going on, to say communion. We had flies. And then when we're going down into the Jordan River to be baptized, our feet were being just nibbled on by these little fish. I don't know how Joe and David even were speaking coherently, because they had big fish going after their legs. Is that right? So there were just distractions, the lack of water that you would see. We were people that were shoving and pushing and wanting us to move forward when we were ready to just stand. And so it was just amazing how that word distraction kept coming up over and over and over throughout the trip. We got colds, there was military presence. But it was just a beautiful, beautiful time. Well, we had a great trip across the Sea of Galilee from Tiberias up to this area at the top of the Sea of Galilee. And it was really, really cool, because our boat that we took was supposed to be like one that Jesus and them would have taken. And on it, we had the opportunity to, of course, go shopping. And they had shopping opportunities for the tourists as we went on this boat. You know, you got to do something to pass the time. And so when we arrived at this spot, this is an old ancient Galilee fishing boat that was discovered in 1984. They had had such a drought that the water had receded so much from the Sea of Galilee that these 2 men were out in the water and they found this boat. It had been covered in mud, and they were like, how are we going to get this thing out of the water, out of the mud? So they came up with an ingenious idea to keep it wet, because if they dried it out too fast, it would have crumbled. So they put water and foam. And so they dug down, sucked foam all around it, and so then they floated it out of the water, and this is what they were able to find. It's made out of 12 different kinds of wood, and just, it's phenomenal to think that Jesus, this is the type of boat that Jesus and his disciples would have used as they had gone fishing. One of the other things that was really, really cool is we were in an area up at the top of the Sea of Galilee, and we visited 3 different churches. One was the Church of the Beatitudes, which would have been in the area that Jesus would have given his Beatitude sermon from Matthew 5. And another thing, you know, we talked about seeing different kinds of people. Well, there were Ethiopians everywhere we went, and they were chanting. And how cool that they bring their own musical instruments, and you're hearing them singing and playing their instruments. But it's just so beautiful to see them sharing their faith. Also, I think Blanche mentioned that there's a lot of agriculture in this area. At the top of the Sea of Galilee, particularly through Capernaum, it was a heavy trade route. So they would have olives and fruit and vegetables, and so they try to protect all these plants in order to bring the harvest in, because that's a moneymaker for them. So again, we're up on top of a mountain looking, I guess, west. But that's sort of some of their coverage. This is the other church area that we went to, and it was a really special area because this is where Jesus did the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. And in this area were 7 important springs. This just happens to be one of them that's left. So it was a place where a lot of fishermen came in, and people, once Jesus came, they just thronged to them. And it was really cool to see these 2 churches that allowed us to pretend like we were there when Jesus was feeding the multitudes. Here's the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves. Very simple. Up front you see the altar right here, and under there is a rock that they feel that Jesus would have laid the fish and the bread for it to multiply in order to get it out to the people. And there it is. And the other piece, if you notice right here, the fish and the loaves, that's a sin that we saw a lot in the pottery that was over there. Laura's got a piece that you can see. The other thing that was really impressive is the restoration of the mosaics that they've done throughout there on the floors. They have depictions of the animals and the vegetables that are grown in the area. So it just allowed you to see what beautiful artisans they had in that area. This is the other one. It was the Church of St. Peter's Primacy, and this was the Wright believed. If you were to go in the church with me, to the right is the wall of the church, and this rock extends through the wall outside next to the Sea of Galilee, and the sea would have been up against the building, so it's receded a whole lot. But this is where Jesus came, they believe, came to the disciples after he rose and asked Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. As well as it would have been where he prepared the disciples breakfast after they had been out fishing and not have gotten any fish. And you'll also notice that we're, being a rock person that I am, notice that the rocks will start to change. Down in Masada, we had a lot of limestone, lighter rocks. Now we're getting into, you're seeing some balsa rock, which is more volcanic, which is in this area. We then went to the town of Capernaum. which is the home of where Jesus did most of his teaching. He lived there with Peter and Peter's family. It's very close to the Sea of Galilee, so he could get on a boat and go anywhere he wanted to do his teaching. And we found it interesting. Their spelling is their spelling, and then the spelling that we see is our spelling. So you just have to know the different kind. And again, talking about the trade route, if you look in the far distance, there's a Greek Orthodox church that's dedicated to the disciples. But so many different religions are coming together in this area. This is the Catholic Church that has built over top of Peter's house. They've raised this building on 8 pillars so that you look through the church down there to see Peter's house, and then here's the church that's very contemporary. But you're still in the town of Capernaum. The synagogue that Jesus would have taught at, Jesus also picked up 5 of his disciples in Capernaum, which were buddies. And over on the right-hand side, you can see worshipers over there just touching the columns and singing prayers to whatever their needs were and whenever they came. But you can tell it's very popular. And olives were big there, and they would use it for the olive oil. And these were the type of presses that they would have. You'd stick a log on this piece, because you're thinking, how are you going to lift that stone? So you would stick a piece of wood there or in here and lower it, mash out the olive oil, and it would go into the little trough right there. But it was fun to see all these old relics that were there. The next little city we went to was called Magdala, and this was a new city that was found. Everything there is new excavation, which we think is pretty cool because we think our 200 years old is old. But these are just being discovered. This was one of the better synagogues that we found that was restored, as well as this altar that was found. And I don't know if you can see, but up here at the top, there's 6 loaves of bread. So if you cut them in half, that would give you the 12 tribes of Israel. And then you had a heart. You've got water jugs here to cleanse yourself before you would go into the synagogue. And then you would have your menorah and the columns on either side to walk into the synagogue. So that was pretty symbolic. Also, throughout our trip, whether we were in Masada or here in Magdala, there were purification pools that women would go into to cleanse themselves after childbirth. And you would go down on one side, and there were always 7 steps, and then you'd come out cleansed on the other side. And if you remember the story in the Bible about the woman that had been bleeding for 12 years, and all she wanted to do, she heard Jesus was coming, and all she wanted to do was touch his cloak. And she thought, if I touch his cloak, I'll be healed. So she went to the town, and see how narrow those roads are compared to Bethsaida, where Blanche took us. Those were big Roman roads. These are little teeny Israeli roads. And so you can imagine this woman sitting there in the road and reaching out to Jesus' cloak. And he says, she's all of a sudden healed. And he says, who touched me? And she said, I did. And he told her to go and share her faith with others. But do you see how skinny this is? This little town, too, was a huge merchant fishing. And so the merchants would bring their fish in, put them in different pools, and then people would come and buy their fish. So it was fun to see the pools that they would have put them in. This painting was in the church that was at this Magdala area. And if you look right here, if you look right here, here is her hand of the woman. And this just came alive for me, thinking that she was down on the ground just to touch his cloak. All right, here we are back in Corazon. We went there one morning early, and this was a really cool spot because, as you can see, we got our balsam rock there. There, we learned about the evangelical triangle. How many of y'all know what that is? We didn't know. Laura does, of course. Judy and Blanche know. But we didn't know. But there were 3 cities in the Bible that Jesus had denounced or cursed. And Capernaum was one of them. Corazon is one. And Bethsaida is another. Because they did not believe the miracles that he was performing. And so this is one of those cities that had done. All right, here's Pastor Joe. We've had communion. And I want to ask, let's see, our wedding planner. Blair and Blanche. Anybody else a wedding planner? Oh, and Mona, thank you. So all of you girls, you don't have to worry about anything here. Because as Joe said, when it was time for a man to ask for a girl's hand in marriage, he would go to his father would give him a cup of wine and pass it to his son. And then his son would then take the cup to his intended bride. If she took the cup and drank from it, she says, I pledge my life to you. But if she didn't, too bad. So, okay, now she's got the cup, she's been proposed to. The job that the husband now has to do, he's got to go build the house. And the house is not just, in a field, he's got to build it within the city. So you can see how this square is going on. So he's out there with all his menfolk, and they're building the house, and the the girl is over there getting all her dowry ready and sewing her clothes and doing all that stuff. And so she's waiting and waiting and waiting for him to finish this house. And then all of a sudden, there's this horn that blows, the shofar, the curling horn. And she's going, oh, me, that must be for me. So she gets all ready, and he comes with all of his mates and all, and they have the ceremony, all here in the center. And then the bride and groom go into the new house that's been built, and they consummate the marriage, and then the groom lets the best man know, okay, we're done. And then party for 7 days. Can you imagine? This is a hardy group of people that can go that hard. Yeah. But anyway, so this was really a fun, just hearing that story of life, of what it would be like. All right. This is called the seat of Moses. And what this would have been a teaching seat. So who's our teacher? Judy. Miss Judy is our teacher here. And as you can see, it has all the etchings and all the carvings in Hebrew. Another, just looking out, if you look way far in the background, there's the Sea of Galilee. So a little bit more fertile than Masada. This was another city on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Curacy. It's where Jesus spoke to the first non-Jewish congregation. It was a huge Christian area that was at this church. Really many special things that we did here. We had communion again. We also had a sing-along, and we laughed and sang and just really enjoyed each other's company. We weren't in a rush, and we just enjoyed it. While there, we also learned the story of the man. Remember the man that was demon-possessed, and he came to Jesus, and he was, not very nice? Well, Jesus said, I'm going to take your demons, and you go to all those pigs that are up in the mountains. Well, when he took all those demons and put them in those pigs, the townspeople were furious because that's their livelihood, that's their food. And those pigs, what did they do? Tell me what they did. Ran off the cliff into the water. So there goes all your money. Whoop, 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 throwing money out in the sea. So this was a place that we learned even more. Again, the mosaics were beautiful. And this is a prayer sand burst. And so there's biblical writings on this, and people would turn it and imprint the literature all on the sand. And it was really, really fun to read. All right, that's where they jumped off, or so they told us. But the water would have been much higher. You can see their people. I got the wrong thing. See, those people had, I think some of y'all, did any of y'all hike up? Yeah. That's what I thought. But they would have gone flying. You know the saying, do pigs fly? Over here they do. All right, we're getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. We're in Nazareth, and we're at the Church of the Annunciation, where Mary would have been visited by an angel. And we learned that she could have been visited at a well, or she could have been visited at one of the caves that were inside. They have built the church all around this cave right here, which is amazing. There were tons and tons of caves in this area, which would have been really fascinating, because that's maybe been where they would have lived. And throughout the inside and outside were all these beautiful, beautiful mosaics or paintings or sculptures of the mother and the child from different countries. See, here's the Ethiopian one right here, France, Italy, Bulgaria, Belarus. And you know Jimmy, he was always looking out for us. So he goes into this little shop, and again, they all knew him. And he bought all of us baklava. It was delicious. Wasn't it good, Blanche? Our last stop before we head to Jerusalem was Caesarea. And you heard about old mean King Herod. Well, he was a crazy dude. But he did so much of the building in this area. He was a ruthless ruler. In many of the things that he did, he was very paranoid. I have to tell you, because he is really ugly. And I can't read because I forgot my glasses. He was very paranoid ruler. He was violent. He executed one of his wives, murdered his sister's husband, had his nephew tracked down by his army, killed 3 of his sons, and married his niece to secure power. No wonder he killed all those little boys in Bethlehem after Jesus was born. So he was all about him. But if you look at Caesarea now, this is the town where he wanted this, again, to show how powerful he was. So if you're a merchant coming in here, you're going to be looking back at Caesarea, and you're going to see a whole city right here of power. He had palaces forever. This was an area where he could hold Olympic Games, or have chariot races, or lions come out and eat people. But these were the part of the palaces that he had. But this is the Mediterranean that we're looking over. Oops. Again, the area where he would have had his chariot races. So this is a huge piece of property. So you can see how big it is. And the first infinity pool ever invented. Inside the palace, he had a freshwater pool and a saltwater pool, and he would have fish in there to entertain all of his guests. And the amphitheater, excuse me. And one of the cool feats that he created were these aqueducts that we would start to see here. That they would build 8 miles of aqueduct to move water from one area to the other. And as they would move the water, you're thinking, well, this is just flat land. It would go down an inch for every mile to go down. But they're beautiful, and we were there at the end of the day, so the sun was just really spectacular. It's fun to see that. All right, we're off to Bethlehem. Oh, excuse me. We ran into somebody in Jerusalem. While Laura and I were there in Jerusalem our last day, Foster, I'm in Jerusalem. Y'all want to get together? So we were able to have breakfast with Foster Jennings and walk the wall of the old city. So it was so fun. All yours, baby.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're off to Bethlehem. Bethlehem, if you look on your map, it's just south of Jerusalem. It's only about 5 miles. But to get to Bethlehem, you have to go through a checkpoint. And we went through the checkpoints a couple of times, but it's really quite shocking to see huge concrete walls. Sometimes the walls were like this, but the divisions between the West Bank and the rest of Israel. So to get to Bethlehem, you have to go through a checkpoint. And once we went through the checkpoint, the difference was pretty shocking. The Bethlehem West Bank area was much poorer than the other part of Jerusalem. Lots more poverty. The main site in Bethlehem, of course, is the birth of Jesus. And we toured the Church of the Nativity. And it's been a church there since the 300s. Followers of Jesus would make pilgrimage here. And the first church was started by Constantine and his mother in the early 300s. Again, you're in the West Bank, so it's a Palestinian area. So here is the Church of the Nativity, and right across the square is a mosque, and you hear the call to prayer while you're there. To get in the Church of the Nativity, you go through the door of humility. And it's a tiny opening, and the whole idea is to humble yourself before you go in to see where Jesus was born, because he humbled himself so, being born in the manger, his whole way of entering our earth. So there I am. This is driving me crazy. There I am going in the Church of the Nativity. This was one of the most special moments of the whole trip for me. We are in the grotto where Jesus was born. You hear that he was born in a manger. Well, it was really more like a cave or a grotto. And our group assembled in the grotto. We had lighted candles and we sang Silent Night, and it was just an amazing moment for me. Just imagining really that night and what his birth meant for all of us. Another place we visited in Bethlehem was a Palestinian wood carving factory, and this was a family-owned factory by a Christian Palestinian family. And there's lots of olive trees everywhere in Israel, and this place uses olive wood and carves it into just magnificent works of art. You can see this is a manger scene. And anyway, and of course we enjoyed purchasing some of this, but it was just magnificent.
There's some examples too.
Yes, we have some examples over here. And then last but least, we went to Shepherd's Field in Bethlehem, where the shepherds were told that Jesus had been born. And this whole area has lots of caves, and we learned that when the shepherds were out with their flock, a lot of times at night they would go in a cave with their animals, and then they would lay across the entrance to the cave to protect their flock. And this again is what it would have been like where Jesus was born, not in like a manger, but in a cave or a grotto. And so here we are in Shepherd's Field, and I was hoping when we came out that we would see a big star overhead. But we didn't see a star, but we did have this magnificent sunset. So then from Bethlehem, we went to Jerusalem. And this is a view of Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. And this view is pretty much what Jesus would be looking at on Palm Sunday when he started on the Mount of Olives and rode his donkey down through the valley
through the valley and up to Old Jerusalem. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but this would be the location of the Hebrew temple, where Solomon's temple and the second temple. So if you visualize, these are the old walls of the city. You know, Jesus would have the same view from the Mount of Olives when he started that day on Palm Sunday to enter Jerusalem. And yes, there are still donkeys here on Mount of Olives. In fact, here we are. I do love all the entrepreneurs everywhere, but for a small fee, you can have a picture with the Palm Sunday donkey. I'm sure it's the same donkey. And then from the Mount of Olives, we walked down the Mount of Olives to the Garden of Gethsemane. And this was another very special place. The Garden of Gethsemane has ancient olive trees. They think some of them could have dated as far back as the time of Jesus. And of course, this is where he went the night he was betrayed to pray with his disciples. And just to think that some of these trees, you know, might have shielded him that night was just amazing. The next slide shows this old stone walkway from the Garden of Gethsemane that would go up to Caiaphas's house. And this walkway, this road, dates before Christ. So it's very, you know, he came up these very stones right here that night after he was betrayed. Then we went to St. Peter and Gallicantu Church, and this is built on the site of Caiaphas's house. So this is where Jesus was taken Thursday night. And the courtyard would be where Peter denied him 3 times. And if you look, there's a rooster on the top of the church. But also underneath this site, they have found a dungeon, a big pit. And this would have been where Jesus was thrown down in this pit to spend the rest of the night, that Thursday night. And, excuse me, this was just a very moving place for us to think that our Lord was treated this way, put down in this pit, was just terrible. It felt very heavy and dark and anyway. So from there we followed the Via Dolorosa, which means Street of Sorrows, and we really followed Jesus' steps that Friday. When you follow the Via Dolorosa, there are 14 stations of the cross. I'm sorry, y'all. Got a cough. And it's in the old city of Jerusalem. If you see, the stations of the cross are up on the streets, and it starts from when Jesus was taken to Pontius Pilate's house, getting his crown of thorns. There's different artwork. This shows Jesus receiving the cross. And you see pilgrims from all over the world stopping at these different stations of the cross, praying at them, remembering the different things that happened to Jesus that day on the way to the crucifixion. So the stations of the cross continue to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is a huge church that was built over the site of Jesus' crucifixion and also his burial. And this is the altar of where Jesus was crucified. Underneath the altar, you can see someone leaning down. It's the stone, and they think that his cross was put in that crevice. Here's a mural. There's beautiful artwork in here. Here's a mural of Jesus after he had died and was taken down from the cross. And here's the stone that his body was laid on. And also in the church is a big altar that you can go in, and this is one of the sites that they think was where his tomb was, and then where he was resurrected. Judy?
All right. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up our last few days of our trip in Jerusalem. And this are the walls around the old city. The old city of Jerusalem is the heart and soul of the holy city. It is 1 square kilometer, and the walls date to 1537 or thereabouts. And actually 40,000 people live inside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Now here's a little map I just want to show you. Here's the perimeter. And there are 11 gates, 7 of which are working now, and they're beautiful names. Zion Gate, Dung Gate, Herod's Gate, Jaffa Gate, the Damascus Gate, Gate of Mercy. And those are entrance points into the old city. And as you can see, it's divided into 4 neighborhoods or quarters. The Armenian quarter, which is the smallest, the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Muslim quarter. Laura just pointed out the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in the Jewish quarter. Here's the Tower of David over here. The Jewish quarter has the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall, which you'll see in just a minute. In the Muslim quarter, we have the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim holy site, and that's where Muhammad ascended to heaven. So when we entered, Jimmy told us that it's easy to get lost in here. And he said that people that have living here for years can still get lost. And you can see all these little narrow streets. And they don't make any sense. So they're just little, some of them are just little passageways, little tunnels. You see armed Israeli soldiers in there with their machine guns. You see lots of tourists, but you also see life of the people that are living there. And that's what was appealing to me. I loved our last day there. We had a couple hours to spend however we wanted, and I went back to the walled city just to see, get more of the life of the people that live there. So I took a bunch of pictures kind of secretly. People don't like having their pictures taken. But I must say, everything I observed and everything I've read, the Muslim quarter is the most lively of the 4 neighborhoods, because that's where you see the spice markets, women actually going to the spice markets, the vegetable stands, doing their shopping. So I'm just gonna click through a couple of these different sites. Here's a Jewish gentleman hanging his wares. You see a lot of shops. If you get claustrophobic, it can be kind of crowded in some of the little narrow streets. And here's a Muslim woman, and also with these little children. And it was just amazing to see the different people living there, the multiculturalism. I had no idea that's what Israel would be like, but I was very surprised at that. Here's one of the many spice markets that you see there, and some of, let's see, and some of the biggest cabbages I've ever laid eyes on. Here's another little market with a Muslim woman. These are typical Muslim women I saw in the Muslim quarter. And Jimmy told us if we got lost, just to look up, and hopefully we would see a gate or a sign that showed us the way out. So that was fun. Here's some Jewish salesmen. An example of a fruit market. These are falafel. Oops, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong thing. These are falafel balls that they're cooking right there, and we had those a lot throughout our trip. They're kind of a staple of the food over there. This is a Hasidic Jew. You could tell by his hat, his fur hat, juxtaposed to this gentleman over here. In his, I guess, I don't know if that's Arabic or Muslim, I'm not sure, but this gentleman, this is our group. We were out in the street waiting, and he came up with his little cart full of bread, And the neat thing about the old city is that you would see just tons of groups coming through on their pilgrimage. And we saw groups coming through the narrow streets singing at the tops of their lungs, or it was just amazing. So it was just full of life, and I would highly recommend that you can go there one day. I thought this is this is a real juxtaposition. We have this older gentleman with a very old sewing machine, watched by a Muslim woman, and a gift shop, Alabama, the heart of Dixie. So, so that's funny. So, when you're in the Jewish quarter, you have to go through the guard gate to get to the Wailing Wall, also called the Western Wall. And there's a big, huge plaza there. This is one of the most holy sites in the world for Jews. The Western Wall is the last remaining wall of what was the second Jewish temple destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So thousands of people journey there every year to visit and pray. And these prayers are either spoken or written down. So it's divided up into the women's side and the men's side. This is the women's side. And everybody takes a little piece of paper and they write their prayer. And they stuff it into a crevasse or a crack in the wall. And most of the people here are just sitting, they're praying, they're reading the Torah or the Bible. It's a very peaceful, holy place. And this is the men's side. These are Hasidic Jews. You can tell by their dress, their long locks of hair down the side. And David, do you remember what it is when they're praying like this against the wall? Does anybody remember? But sometimes you would see the Hasidic Jews going like this against the Wailing Wall. It's an ancient rite of theirs. I'm not sure what it's called. Okay. The Garden Tomb is located just outside the old city walls in Jerusalem. Inside this peaceful garden park is an ancient Jewish tomb that many believe is a site of Jesus' burial and resurrection. It was unearthed in 1867. The site is maintained by volunteers who come from around the world and join a team of local Israelis and Palestinians to keep the site beautiful and welcoming. In fact, when we were in the gift shop on our way out, we met an American woman who was there with her husband, volunteering just for about 3 months. So whether this is the exact tomb where Jesus was laid, no one really knows. But what is important is that pilgrims come from around the world to have an encounter with the living Messiah. So this sign says, Jesus Christ, declared with power to be the Son of God by the resurrection from the dead. Romans 1:4. And here's our group going inside. This is what it looks like from the outside. And there's the interior. And I'm just going to read this inscription. Then Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby. So there were groups all over the park, each having their own worship service, their own communion. Next to our group was a group from South America. They were banging drums and playing the guitar and singing at the tops of their lungs, very joyously. It was a really amazing place. Here on the door coming out, it says, "He is not here, for he is risen." And this is our very last communion that we took. It is fitting that we had our last communion there as we all sat in a circle. And we went around, each person shared what was most important or what had been very meaningful to them on the trip. And we heard some really amazing stories about what each person had experienced. So I'm going to tell you my story. Some of y'all may have heard this in my circle, but I'm going to repeat it because it's pretty amazing. But you may wonder why there's a St. Louis Cardinals hat here, but my dad was a lifelong Cardinals fan. And he was stationed at Scott Air Force Base outside of St. Louis and after World War II. So he loved the Cardinals. And so about close to 25 years ago, I got sent out there for a work trip, and I bought my dad a hat that looked just like this, beautiful embroidery and everything, and it cost me a lot of money. It was like $20, which was a lot of money back then. So gave it to him. He and my mom were going to Israel with their small church in Charlottesville, their Methodist church. So he took the hat, he was really pleased with it, and they went to Israel, and I don't know much about their trip, but what I do remember is that he came back and he didn't have the hat. And he said, I gave the hat away. I said, what? How could you give the hat away? I bought that hat just for you. It cost me a lot of money. I was really mad. He says, well, let me tell you. My dad he had a big heart. He said, there was this little boy over there. He was selling candy bars. His name was Mohammed. He was about 10 years old. He was a Palestinian. And I was so impressed with his business acumen because he wore a bow tie and a suit. And he was just a cut above all the little street urchins and all the salesmen. So I was so impressed with him, I gave him the hat. I said, well, okay, I'll forgive you, you know. I have no idea where this little boy named Mohammed was. He could have been in Haifa or, Tel Aviv or Jericho or Jerusalem. I don't know. So fast forward 25 years. I'm sitting in our first night in Jericho at the hotel after dinner, and I'm talking to Betty Ann, who's our tour guide, and I told her this story. And she said, Judy, I know Mohammed. He's at the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem. You're going to meet him on the last day of your trip. I said, what? She said, yeah. So he's still there selling candy bars. So this is Mohammed today. Blanche and I and a couple others went up to him and we peppered him with questions. Were you here when you were a little boy? Yes. Were you selling candy bars? Yes. Were you wearing a suit? He says, yes, I wore a tuxedo. I asked him if he remembered the hat. He did not remember the hat. But so as soon as I got back to the States, I found, that's my dad. There. Same exact background, Mohammed. Betty Ann showed the picture to Mohammed. He got a kick out of seeing himself as a little boy. So it was a great thing for me to see where my parents walked. The sad thing is that Mohammed is still selling candy bars. He has a degree in computer science. He has 2 little girls. And it's very tough for Palestinians to get good jobs over there. Jimmy told us that they're not allowed to work in any of the, pharmaceutical companies or the big factories over there, that the Israelis punish 99% because of 1% they're scared of because of terrorism. So it was very educational for us to go. We stayed in Palestine. We went to a gift shop run by Palestinian young men. We stayed in a hotel owned by Palestinians. So it was very eye-opening for us. But this is my Israeli miracle story. So I just want to add a closing that I hope we can have a trip for First Pres to go or go back with eternity, like Cynthia and Blanche and Laura said, to see these sites and to experience communion there is very powerful and very moving. And I would like to go back. I could not absorb it all. I'm very Virginia, 1607, Jamestown, 400 years, that's our history. In Israel, it's just layer upon layer upon layer of civilizations and, it's very, very confusing. But so I would love to go back. And I feel like if I had gone just as a tourist, I would not have gotten as much out of going if I had not been with this wonderful Christian group. To go there on a pilgrimage is very special, and that made a huge difference for me. So now I'm just going to, on our way back from Bethlehem, I think our next to last day there, we were coming back to Jerusalem to our hotel. And Laura showed the beautiful sunset, and the sunset was just gorgeous as we were driving in the bus. And the bus driver put on a song on the bus, the Holy City, Jerusalem. And we started singing at the tops of our lungs. And that became our anthem for the next 2 days. So we are going to sing that, and we'd like to thank Suzanne and Jim Ferguson. And Jim's going to sing the verses, and everybody, we invite you to find the sheet of paper at your table and sing the choruses together. If you'd all like to stand, that would be great. And then David is going to close us with prayer after we sing.
Shadow of a cross let us continue to honor the King. Let's pray. Lord, only you would come down and live amongst us. And in your love, in your goodness, we rest. And as we have traveled on this journey into those places where you walked, those homes that you entered, and the things that you did, Lord, we pray, come in that same reality. Come into our homes. Help us to touch the hem of your garment. Walk the streets of Richmond again, so that in the power of your Spirit, your living presence will be made manifest both in us and in this nation. Hosanna in the highest. Amen. Amen.
Wow.